let me welcome Tristan. Lovely to see you. I know you've had a fleeing journey throughout Ireland to get to where you are tonight. And thank you so much for joining us at short notice as well. So lovely to have you on board.
Good evening. It's lovely to be here from the what I've seen of the beautiful city of Waterford, which I've never been to before.
Delighted to have you. Listen, let's start, if we may, because I think it's really important, first of all, to understand where you come from with your journey as a CEO of a organization. Now, you're not a charity, are you? FASD Ireland isn't a charity. Can you explain that, first of all, what the difference is with your organization?
Yes, so essentially I decided to go down the route of creating a social enterprise, quite simply because it allowed us to be able to react very quickly in an environment where there had been very little support previously. And starting up any kind of organization that aims to support people and raise awareness, you just never know what direction you need to go in. And rather than have the shackles of a board of trustees that would have to clear every which way that I wanted to go, I decided that to be able to react quickly, a social enterprise model would be the best model for us. That's not to say that the charitable model won't apply later down the road on future projects, but right now it fits very, very well for us.
And I think that's something that happens with a lot of organisations all over the UK. As part of the UK Alliance, the FASD UK Alliance, there are so many different organisations, and they might be initially started from 2 people, 3 people, a little conglomerate that are there trying to support other people. Can you tell us about your journey and how you came to become CEO of FASD Ireland?
Well, Scott and I adopted over 15 years ago now, two siblings, and we had no idea about FASD back then. And roll forward sort of 7 or 8 years later, and with the phone rang, and we had a rather desperate telephone call from the same agency asking if we could consider expanding our family. We said no. We just about got to the stage where we could go out for dinner again. And they said, well, we'll just send you a picture. Well, that was enough.
Yeah.
That little boy arrived with what I regard as a post-it note plethora of diagnosis. Every professional that had ever met with him had given another diagnosis and literally popped that post-it note on his head. We had absolutely no clue what really was going on for him, and so we started to peel away some of those diagnoses. We started to investigate. We looked at the placement reports. It became very obvious very quickly that there was exposure to alcohol in utero, and we decided to pursue that route. And glad that we did, because I hate to think now where we would be had we not have decided to go back and look at that placement report. We subsequently looked at the placement reports of our other 2 children who came from a different birth family, and it became obvious that our middle child also had been exposed to alcohol in utero as well. However, he was by this time in his late teens, and whilst we had the discussion, he felt that he didn't need to go down the road of getting a diagnosis, and we respected that with him. And we're very aware, and he's very aware of that, and very accepting of it. So, I mean, some people listening might know that Scott and I lived in Ireland up until the point we decided to adopt children, and we were unable to adopt children as a same-sex couple in Ireland back in the day. So we returned to England, and we started our family. It got to a point where we got rather itchy feet because we didn't really want to live in England, only simply because we had lived in Ireland before. And so there was a window of opportunity, and it's when our youngest son then was transitioning from primary to secondary, and we said it's now or never. And so we bit the bullet, and we returned to Ireland. that opened a whole can of worms, because what we quickly realised was that there was very little to no support or recognition of FASD across the country. Surprisingly, because Ireland has the third highest prevalence globally after South Africa and Croatia, it's estimated currently that 244,000 people in Ireland have or live with FASD. So COVID came upon us. We were getting very frustrated. School phone calls were coming home every other day. It was just back into a spiral of decline of difficult behaviours, very upsetting phone calls, lack of support from agencies, no recognition. Even our GP said, FASD, what's that? I've never heard of it. And that's alarming. And it got to the point where our youngest son's medication was being flown in from Denmark and escorted by the army through the town to the pharmacy. And we had to take 2 forms of identification to pick it up. All sorts of complications, just horrendous. Towards the end of COVID, and I think it's fair to say I had finished working for the railway after 25 years to swap roles with Scott, so that I became the stay-at-home parent and Scott was working as a director for Adoption UK. But roll forward through to the end of COVID, and I was getting incredibly frustrated. The 4 walls of the house were closing in, and I said, right, enough is enough. And I decided on the 9th of September, World FASD Awareness Day, that I was going to set up an organisation and call it FASD Ireland. And that's literally how the organisation came about. I'd had enough, I got frustrated. My voice as a parent wasn't being listened to or being heard in the places it needed to be heard. I'd taken advice from our local TD, that's Irish for MP, and our local TD said, you need an organisation, you need a platform, I will support you, do it. And there was the birth of FASD Ireland in our study, at home, 1 desk, 1 computer, a mobile phone, and no clue what we were about to embark upon.
And that was in 2021, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
And I know because we, as an organization, FASD Awareness, we started in 2018, and through similar sort of background to yourself, where there were so many frustrated people. Our co-founders were so frustrated with a lack of understanding within the medical community. Schools had very little idea of what FASD was. Even as you say, the medical professionals, we hear it about clinical commissioning officers as well. We're saying FASD, questioning what is that, and the moment that that's happening, you're up against it. And I think it does take people like yourself and Scott to really speak out and make your voice louder than everybody else's, because everybody's shouting from the rooftops about something medical, a condition. But I think probably you probably had it harder than most in many ways, and I'm sure people will forgive me for saying that, because I know everybody's got their own issues in their areas, and it's like that in a fragmented country. But in Ireland, I remember hearing so many cases in the past from our support groups and within the UK Alliance that there was just nothing, no understanding. So how did you get your voice heard? I mean, you touched in on it a little bit there, but can you explain a little bit more about what you did to get your voice heard?
Well, the first thing I did was to call around a lot of the people that matter. So we are very fortunate in having such a small population, 5.2 million people in Ireland. So it's the size of Greater Manchester. And with that comes lots of TDs, lots of MPs and senators being the equivalent to the House of Lords in the UK. And so it was a case of writing to them, perhaps ringing them, perhaps inviting them to meet with me. And the Minister for Disability, is a prime example. I contacted her in the November, and she said, okay, I'll give you half an hour.
That was Anne, wasn't it?
That was Anne Rabbit,
Yeah.
yeah. And she said, I'll give you half an hour. And we had a meeting like this because we were in deepest COVID, and the meeting ran for 2 hours. And throughout the meeting, you could just see the light bulbs going on. She was going,
Mm.
I know that child. And what you're talking about, I know that child. I recognize that bold child at the back of the room in the class. Yes, they would have had FASD, but they were always called naughty. So I recognize that child, those children. Why aren't we as a country supporting them? And that's the Minister for Disability.
Yeah.
So I think once you have some of the ministers on board, and I locked horns with a few. It's fair to say I wear my heart on my sleeve a lot of the time. So we have again, we're very lucky. We have a minister for special educational needs and inclusion, which is a lovely government department to have because it focuses on children with those additional educational needs. Um, and she resisted meeting me for about a year. Her people resisted replying to emails for about a year. And then one day I got that lucky moment where she contacted me on LinkedIn and said, we need to talk. And we did talk, and we talked with all of her colleagues in the Department for Education who were absolutely aghast at the figures. And I said to
Mm.
her, in a typical high school setting in Ireland of 600 to 700 children, 28 to 30 of those children will have FASD. And her jaw hit the floor.
Mm.
And at that point, you start to get recognition. When you give them the numbers, that's when they open their ears.
And this is always a big part of the problem as well, isn't it? Trying to obtain those numbers, getting those studies, getting that data in, because with data, we're able to have some flesh to our bones.
Yes,
And I think over the last couple of years, I remember a few months ago, we did a webinar with Sandy Butcher of the National Organisation of FASD. And she said she, as the CEO of the national organization, sits on the shoulders of all those people that have led the way to now. And
yes,
it's all that hard work that we've had that has been able to filter through to the point that we are at now and on the cusp of things. Now, I'm very cautious of saying on the cusp of things because I think anybody that has felt that they're really beginning to motor forward, they're really getting a step forward. I'm just reading some comments here in the questions about how you feel sometimes that you're getting somewhere, and then I know when we spoke to various different people within the medical world, they say, right, yeah, we're getting somewhere. And then that team leader leaves. And they were the voice that really powered it. MPs that have supported the campaign, they get voted out, and that you've lost that whole area of getting into Parliament and being able to talk. So
yes,
I'm very conscious of that, but at the same time, it still has to keep moving. We have to keep and I think when you've got the figures, as you say, when you talk to people and you have those figures, it can be anybody.
yes,
But if you're talking and you're expressing, you can use case studies as well, individual case studies saying, showing exactly how it doesn't all have to be negative. It can be positive, but simple, effective work early on can support and lead to positive outcomes. And it will save the country so much money in the long term as well, so often. But more importantly, it supports and scaffolds those individuals. So tell us a little bit about what you do as an organization.
Well, essentially, in setting up FASD Ireland, I had to think very quickly about what our key attributes were going to be. Why were we there?
Mm.
And so the first reason, I suppose, was to provide support to families that needed support, to provide the signposting, to provide the guidance and advice, to listen to them, to find out what they wanted, and to give them assurance that life is not all doom and gloom. So support was really key for us. Raising awareness was another one because, right from the very first day of arrival into Ireland, where a GP said, I don't know what FASD is. So to me, that's alarm bells. And so we absolutely, had to raising awareness on part of our reason of existence. And coupled with that, it's very much about educating people, and educating society. You know, Ireland has a very toxic relationship with alcohol. It's been acceptable in Ireland to drink alcohol through pregnancy since time began. And even up to the late 80s, where bottles of stout were on trolleys in maternity wards in hospitals being pushed round and given to pregnant mothers so that the mother and the baby wouldn't get anemia. So this isn't about, for us, this is not about blaming and shaming mothers. This is about re-educating the whole of society by raising awareness of the risks of alcohol and exposing the fetus to alcohol through pregnancy. And more so in Ireland, where 2 in 5 pregnancies are unplanned. It's about raising awareness of the risks if people are thinking about getting pregnant. And so our core message is, you know, if you are thinking about getting pregnant, or you are already pregnant, then stop drinking if it is safe for you to do so. And that's really, really important.
With the feedback from the support and your telephone lines, what
Yeah.
what do you find to be the most common areas that are asked of you?
I think, well, so our telephone lines are hot,
Yeah, I
and
bet.
there is a really nice blend of calls coming in. So on the one hand, it is very concerned parents who want to talk to us about their concerns. Perhaps a child is missing milestones, and they just, you know, they're just wondering if there is a risk. But on the other hand, the telephone calls are coming from professionals. They are coming from
Mm.
social workers. They are coming from educators. They're coming from medical professionals, saying all sorts of strange and wonderful things. So I had somebody from CAMS call me um, last week, and they said, I've got a child who is very likely to have FASD. How do I get a diagnosis? And
Mm.
I said, can you just tell me where you are from? And they said, yeah, I'm from CAMS in Ireland. I'm not going to say
Mhm.
where.
Yeah.
I said, but you are the agency responsible for diagnosing. And they said, well, we don't have anybody here in this county. Now, I know of 2 counties in the 26 in Ireland where there are professionals who can and will diagnose FASD. And I had to share that information internally in our own healthcare system to be able to help that family. But of course, we are now in the position where we're getting so many calls from the professional agencies that, and it feels alien to me, but I have to say, first of all, is this a favor, or are you going to give me a purchase order number? Because
Absolutely.
money doesn't, you know, our existence costs money, and we are funded in a very innovative way, but it's not a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
And I would suggest to you that at least 50% of our calls are coming from the very professionals whose jobs, we could say, are there to help these people, these children, young adults, and older.
And I know you offer training, and we've been doing a lot of work recently. Dr. Raj Mukherjee, who's coming on next month actually, and going to be doing our webinar next month. We've just been working with him in upskilling community paediatricians here in the southeast, and
Yeah,
our charity have been working with demonstrating the lived experience, what it's like living with FASD, so that the community paediatricians understand how valuable it is to latch onto that diagnosis early on.
yes,
And also, we're there to answer any of their questions as well, because so many questions are coming in about just what it is to live with it, because people want to know. They want, you go into medicine to support and help, and also to understand as much as you can about the person that's sitting in front of you. Now, I've got a question that came up for me earlier that they wanted to put over to you was, with the different diagnosis that, I mean, you saw it with your own son, multiple diagnosis.
mhm,
How do you then go to your pediatrician and tell them, look, all of these actually, they're all relevant, they're all comorbidities, but
yeah.
they have to fit under the umbrella term of FSD. You understand that, but Can you explain how you would go about doing that?
Yeah, so it's a significant step change for Ireland because we don't have those gatekeeping paediatricians where, for example, a child would be missing milestones, and so there would be perhaps a referral from primary school through SENCO to CAMS with an EP, an educational psychologist or an occupational therapist to refer to a community paediatrician to get onto that kind of rung. We don't have that in Ireland. So what happens is that parents would go, "Oh, my child is a bit different. The next door neighbour's child is a bit different. What's wrong with their child? Oh, I'll ask them. Oh, they've got autism. Ah, my child has got autism. I'm going to pay €500 to go to a specialist and get a diagnosis for autism." And that's literally what's happening.
Right.
So it's a preconceived diagnosis where the parent is paying the professional for the diagnosis that they requested. And so what we're trying to demand from the Department of Health right now is that we want community paediatricians to be the gatekeepers so that every child seeking a diagnosis goes through the gatekeeper. And the reason for that is because we want FASD discounted. We want it removed at the beginning, not 10, 15 years down the line when all of a sudden it's flagged that, oh, the child has got so many comorbidities, and now the parent is saying, well, yes, you know, we've just found out about this FASD and we never knew anything about it, and there's a good chance my child might have that. So we're running I mean, we run a lot of campaigns because we have to, but our campaign this period for us is our -9 campaign, and we are desperately trying to persuade all of the agencies when a child is presented to them for assessment, instead of starting that assessment from base zero where they're born, we're asking them to go back -9 months and talk about, was your pregnancy planned? When did you find out you were pregnant? What was life like before you found out you were pregnant? Did you abstain from anything like alcohol, smoking, da-di-da-di-da? And having those difficult, honest, frank conversations with the parents so that we can discount FASD at the beginning.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because up until our existence and up until we became quite vocal in the health arena, our health service, it's called the HSE, our health service would kind of spew out these numbers and say, well, you know, Ireland had 2 children with FASD born last year. And that's because either there was a record on mum's midwife's notes that mum was an alcoholic, or the midwife or whoever was helping with the birth noticed there was facial dysmorphia, and so they were the only records being kept. And so whenever a parliamentary question was submitted, and we've submitted lots, and they are on our website there for people to read, the same response comes back time and time again, in that Ireland doesn't have a problem with FASD. There's only 2 or 3 births of concern every year, because we need a significant step change. We need to recognise that with the 82% of women drinking alcohol through pregnancy in Ireland, 13% of those are going to give a conversion into FASD. So we know that's around 2,500 babies every year born in Ireland with FASD.
And those are the figures that you were saying earlier. When you hear those, you cannot be anything other than shocked and want to see change. Now, one of the things that we've done for many years, and we work with a lot of organizations around the world, actually, in trying to eliminate the stigma that is attached to it, because usually the stigma is attached, or people assume that it's women that have a problem with alcohol. And actually,
Yes.
quite often, particularly in Ireland, you mentioned earlier that Ireland has a culture of drinking. We have a culture of drinking in the UK as well, particularly with young women and young men. So it's inevitable that it will happen in many cases. And I think the important thing here is that that stigma that is attached, as soon as you start working with people, trying to bring them in. We talked with Raja Mukherjee, and also with Dr. Soji Abiona, a community pediatrician and one of our trustees. And he was saying that with the new NICE guidance that came in the UK, one of the most important things there was to be able to work with the midwifery team in trying to identify what the behaviors were before the mother was pregnant. So rather than going in and asking the mother, did you drink during your pregnancy, which is what midwives were asking, of course, the majority are going to say, no, of course I didn't. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. I didn't dance. I didn't do anything. Of course, they're going to say that. So what you had to do was ask the question a different way to get the answers that you really needed. And that was to go in and say, okay, tell me about your lifestyle prior last year, let's say. What's your sort of lifestyle? How often would you go out? What would you do? How much would you drink? How much would you smoke? How much would you this, that, and the other? And then say, okay, and when did you discover you were pregnant would be another question later on. So now you can work out, okay, this is the lifestyle, but they didn't realize they were pregnant. So potentially they could have been drinking during that period.
Yes.
And that gives you an opportunity to get the information that you actually need to be able to put that forward to pediatricians and say, look, there's a great risk here of FASD. And that way you can work with that. And again, taking away the blame and the stigma, it allows parents to be able to work with you more legitimately and without feeling like they have the guilt. They're still going to have guilt, but educate the public from the earliest ages.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your education and your awareness
Okay.
campaign.
So the third strand of our reason for being is prevention, and that's where the education comes in one half. So we do lots of presentations to school-age children, usually between 14 and 16, in the classroom for about a half an hour. We talk about the risks of exposing the baby to alcohol in utero. I have to, hats off to Martin Butcher because he gave me this tip. But the first thing I do is fill up a vase with vodka and crack an egg into it while I'm talking, which gets the kids more interested in that than what I've got to say. But as you know, the enzymes of the vodka interact with the egg and it causes it to hardball in front of their very eyes. At the same time, I'm showing a slide that will talk about the damage that's done to a brain as it's exposed to alcohol. And it doesn't take much for the children to correlate that. It doesn't need me standing there to go, no, that's the reason why, because the light bulb goes on for them. And I think actually it's a really important way in which we teach that prevention message, because what we talk about is risk all of the time. It's not that we hate alcohol, and I'm never going to be one of those people that will sit here and say, oh, I don't drink alcohol. Of course I do. I enjoy it, but I drink it when it's appropriate to do so. And I do drink it in a very appropriate measures, apart from my stag night, which everybody must, put their hands up to. But I'm not about to be one of those alcohol haters. The point is that we educate children of school age about the risks of drinking alcohol, either when thinking about getting pregnant or when pregnant. And I think that's a really key message, because that's never been addressed. It's the unspoken, it's the guilty pleasure. It's what Ireland wants to turn its back on. And I think that's significant in our prevention message, but it goes further. So we are planning a campaign in December that works hand in hand with the alcohol industry. Again, this is never been done in Ireland, but we're inviting the alcohol industry, so the bars, the restaurants, the nightclubs, to put up a poster on the back of the toilet doors, in the ladies' toilets particularly, saying, if you are pregnant, go to the bar and ask for a complimentary soft drink. We do it for the nominated driver. We need to start doing it for the pregnant lady. Now, the point here is, and I've had a lot of bar staff say to me, well, if they're pregnant, should we just offer them a soft drink? And I said, well, you can if you want a good old clip around the ear, because they might not be pregnant. And then you're embarrassed. So we put it up on the back of a toilet door in a poster. The emphasis there is, if you are pregnant, go to the bar and say, I would like a free soft drink. So that's the plan for us to start. Again, it's a different side of education, but it's addressing this prevention message, which is, one of the reasons we exist.
Absolutely. Can I come on to education now? we have an awful lot of phone calls and a lot of our families that are struggling with education. We've had a question come up here as well, and it's about what's your experience been around the educational support that's available to children, and are you seeing better resources and education in educational settings?
That's an interesting question in terms of that Ireland is now embarking on a real inclusion journey for education. So there's two things. One is that it's actually part of Ireland's constitution that every child has a right to education. Now remember, Ireland is a fairly young state, and it's
Mm.
only recently that children were entitled to go to high school, to secondary school. It's called post-primary in Ireland, in actual fact. So every child in Ireland is entitled to an education. The second piece of legislation, which is more important, is called the Epson Act of 2004. Now, the Epson Act talks about every child being provided with the necessary supports to be fully inclusive in school. Now, that act hasn't been fully implemented in Ireland yet. It's still on statute, but it hasn't been fully implemented. And Ireland is now doing a really careful review of the Epson Act. And we as a fairly vocal organisation in the country about education have been invited to sit as a stakeholder and to review that education with them. And we talk about here that actually it isn't the child that needs to change. It's the organisation, it's the school, it's the state, it's the provision of education. Because what we have in Ireland is we have special education classes, we have special needs assistants, we have special education teachers. Well, there's nothing special about anybody. And actually, when we talk to the children, or we talk to the young adults that have come through the system, they say that the word special is demeaning, it undermines them, it leads to bullying, they don't feel special. Actually, what they have is they have additional educational needs. They need support in education because they have additional needs. So that's one thing that we need to change, and we are working on the language around how we frame what we're doing. But secondly, and more importantly, is that Ireland forever has been providing special education classes. So what they do is anybody with a disability of any kind, whether it be non-visible or visible, gets lumped into this class, and they're all educated together and segregated away from everybody else. Now, we wouldn't accept that in employment at all. We wouldn't accept it in society at all, but we have been accepting of it and applauding the government for opening these classes. And so now we are talking about reviewing the Epson Act so that we have full integration, so that everybody learns to grow up with everybody else and everybody's education is supported. So I think what you'll see in education in Ireland over the coming months is a big change in the way in which we deliver that education. And that's not to say it's going to be perfect. What it says is that we recognise we have a problem in Ireland and that we need to change how we do our education currently. And how we do it at the moment is a complete disaster. We have an organisation called the National Council for Special Education. My last blog was, is the NCSE fit for purpose? So you can imagine my relationship with them is a little bit rusty. But the NCSE does not recognise FASD as a disability. So if you apply for a TA, so they're called SNAs in Ireland, if you apply for a teaching assistant for your child, and you put the reason is because they have FASD, it's rejected. Out of course, straight away rejected. If you put the same application in, but put in secondary ADHD or secondary Tourette's or any comorbid condition associated with FASD, it's approved. Okay. Now that's tragic because as a country, third highest in the world, 244,000 people with FASD, 2,500 babies a year. You know, they're all going into school at some point, and the NCSE does not recognise FASD. So,
But I would say at the same time, Ireland now have you sitting at that table, in a position to be able to wave your flag and make your voice heard, which is fantastic. I'd like to come on, if I may, to the work that you do with the Sunflower
yes,
organization. Can you tell me about that? Because I think this is a lovely story. You know, our Maggie May and your Maggie May. we all love Maggie May. She's been on here many times, and is a great advocate for FASD all over the planet now. So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, well, it's a funny story really, because my youngest son was coming home from school. He had his sunflower lanyard on, and the bus driver threw him off the bus because he didn't have the right money and the card machine wasn't working. And he came home, and I was rather upset, and I rang the bus company and I said, but he's got a sunflower lanyard on. And they said, what's that? So I
Right.
thought, okay, I'm going to, in my usual diplomatic style, I'm going to ring the Sunflower in the UK and say, what's going on here? Why doesn't the bus company in Ireland recognise it? Eventually I got through to the CEO of the Sunflower, and I was going at him hammer and tongs down the phone, and he went, whoa, 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 we're not in Ireland at all. We're in the UK, but we're not in Ireland. We've never been in Ireland. The only reason that the Sunflower is in Ireland is because companies like Tesco have shipped it there. Next have shipped it there with all of their other stores, but we're not in Ireland at all, but we would like to be. And I said, oh, okay, well, and he said, so what do you do? Why are you so passionate about the sunflower? I said, well, you know, I've got 2 children that wear it, and it's important to us as a family. And I gave him some examples of how it's helped us over the years. He said, okay, leave it with me. I'm going to come back to you. And he came back to me on the following Monday, and he said, I've emailed you a contract. I'd very much like for us to work with FASD Ireland. We will help to cross-fund your work if you will support us in Ireland and be our sales agent, for want of a better word. We need you to deliver the sunflower across Ireland, but in doing so, for every sunflower lanyard that you deliver to an organisation, at the end of the day, that's a lot of money when I've got big organisations like Tesco Ireland, for example, filling up with sunflower lanyards. Because I'm delivering them into there, and that's helping to fund what we do as FASD Ireland. And that's a unique and brilliant partnership that allows us to fund our work. It's working really well, and as you pointed out, you know, Maggie May works for us now, and that's very much thanks to the Sunflower organisation for recognising not only her skill, but also that we were in a position that we needed some help, and that the two work really, really well. So Maggie works for us as FASD Ireland, and then the other hat that she wears is that she works also for us as the Hidden Disability Sunflower. One of the key things that's come out of that is that we developed a FASD Ireland sunflower lanyard, which we give to anybody living in Ireland with FASD. And that means that we actually hold the only database in Ireland of people living with FASD. The government hadn't got a clue how many people in Ireland had FASD. And we are now able to demonstrate that, because wherever we go, we talk about the sunflower lanyard, and we talk about the complementary FASD one, and people can register to get that. We don't misuse any of their details. It just helps us to understand how many people are out there living with FASD across the island.
And I have to say, I mean, the sunflower lanyard, for us at home, we have 2 foster children, and both of them have the sunflower lanyard whenever we go out. We've got them in cars ready whenever we need them. And actually, we had respite recently, and it was the first time in 4 years that our 2 birth children and my wife and I had a holiday for a week, and we were flying out of Luton, and we were queuing for ages, and we were all standing there going, oh, do you know what? We wish we had the boys with us right now, because that sunflower lanyard gives you a direct route all the way through. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it really is an absolute godsend, because I think anybody that has a child with learning difficulties and they have to queue up for this, they have to do this, that, and the other. But there's also, I think, a general understanding that you give a little bit of slack when you see it.
Yes.
And I think that is the first thing. It doesn't have to spell it out to people, but what it's doing, no, but you're not identifying them for a disability. You don't know what diagnosis they have, but it's just flagging up that this individual may have a problem with something.
Yes.
And I think that's really good. That's a very, very effective message to get across to the wider public. So, you know, fantastic.
It absolutely is. I mean, it's enough to raise awareness that that person may need some support, assistance, or a little bit more time. and you'll know yourself going through airports, if your child, I mean, I can give you an example. My child would go through security and they'd say, "Can we look in your bag?" And he'd go, "Yeah, there's a bomb in there."
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my heart would sink. I'd think, okay, we're going to get held up here. But now, because I mean, he wouldn't do it now. He's 16. But now when we go through, he has the lanyard on. They take him to one side. They talk to him very quietly and gently, and they explain what they're going to do if they need to, and he's totally on board with it. That has taken away a significant amount of anxiety when we travel as parents. So it's a fantastic tool.
If there are any listeners here that haven't got a lanyard, and they're in Ireland and they have FSD, can they contact you via your website?
Yeah,
And
there's actually a page they can click on, and it's called HD Sunflower on our website, and they can click on that and just apply for a free FASD Ireland sunflower lanyard. If they happen to be listening and they don't have FASD, then the sunflower website in Ireland is hdsunflower.com/IRL. So
brilliant,
they
thank
can
you.
get one from there as well.
That's great. I'd like to move on a little bit. I think it's always really important because my learning curve through being involved with FASD awareness from its start has been considerable, and it's impacted on the way that we work with our family at home dramatically because of the experiences we've learnt from others as well. And our support groups, when we run our support groups, what's so lovely is when you get people that we've given advice and resources to when they were most at need, they come back, their lives are a bit more settled at that moment in time, and they're able to offer new young guns some support, those that are in need then. And you're sharing this experience within these communities, which is so valuable. And often you pick up tips and advice that you think, oh, that's a good one, I'm going to put that into practice. And my wife and I, we're constantly assessing scenarios and how could we change this, how could we make that easier, how could we do this, because if it's triggering a response that is really negative for their experience, we want to try and improve that. So how can we anticipate? In your experience, what are some of the best things that you've learned about FASD that you've been able to put into practice in your family life?
So the key to success really is very silly, very simple. We learned the 22-second rule. So it takes 22 seconds on average for a child with FASD to process a command. Now, we were having all sorts of problems with shower time, bedtime, homework time, sitting down at the table time, anything, turning the telly off time. Until we realized that actually there was an intention to do as we asked, but it took 22 seconds for that command to be processed to fruition, to its end result, to fruition. So once we learned that, and it came about after meeting a very clever educational psychologist who'd done some assessments in class and said, I've timed reaction times, I wanted to do this. And it's been reinforced and reinforced through our journey with other children as well. And so the prime example is, we would tell youngest son to go and have a shower, and he would not go and have a shower. So we would say, I told you, go and have a shower. Come on, it's school night, go and have a shower. And he'd still be stood there. And then we go, oh, come on, go and have a shower. And your voice would just, escalate. We learned that we should be saying, go have a shower. And then we needed to turn around and put the kettle on, because by the time the kettle had boiled, the shower was going.
Yes.
Once we learned that, it de-escalated every single possible meltdown that ever happened, because what we learned was that the first time we said, go have a shower, that was going in and wandering around for 22 seconds till it found where it needed to go. But the second time we said it, it was overwriting the first command and causing confusion. Then if we escalated it and raised our voice and gave a, I told you to, the third command would overwrite the first and the second and cause red mist, which would cause a meltdown and perhaps a violent reaction. We were poking the bear because we didn't realize the 22-second rule. So it's the banner on most of our social media. We love the fact that we didn't discover it, but we love the fact that we're aware of it.
Yes.
And we share it and share it and share it. And we even share it on our SNA training, our TA training that we provide into schools. because it works also for other children that are dysregulated for other reasons. And so this is the genuine whole school approach that you often hear people talking about. If it works for a child with FASD, there's a good chance it's going to work for another child with a different issue.
Absolutely agree with that. And it works also the other way round as well. Absolutely 100%. And I think this is where time and time again, when we are working with our families that might have just received a diagnosis, a lot of adoptive families, a lot of foster families that are unaware of FASD when they come into it, but they weren't to learn. They're feeding, they're sponges, they're learning as much as they can. But everybody is in a race. Everybody's under pressure with time, hit left, right, and center. And what we do find is that it's every organization that we are connected with and we talk to on a regular basis, the overriding thing is when people talk about we have to change the way that we parent.
Yes.
We have to go against the grain of the way that we were brought up, because we're all programmed to parent the way our parents did it, or we learn what we didn't like our parents doing and we adapt accordingly. And that can work both ways. But it's about us changing and being able to adapt our parenting skills based on the information that we receive. And it has to be like that for teachers in school. And it's even harder, I feel, for many teachers in school because they have more red tape they have to adhere to. They're under pressure to get their lesson plans up and running and out and delivered. With disruptions in the classroom, it adds greater issues. And you throw a question at them, you want a response straight away.
Mhm.
And that's the way that teachers are trained. There is such poor training, very early teacher training for any educational needs. And
Yes.
I think this is one of the I was very encouraged to hear what you were saying about where you're hoping to go with this, because this is something that we're working with a lot of the um, educational practitioners down here in the Southeast, trying to work within the clinical commissioning groups as were, particularly in education, about how to deliver a class, how to identify a lot of the problems and how to manage those problems. Can you give us some other insights? Because I know there are quite a few people on here in the education world that want some insights that that was a great one. Have you got any others like that that you
Yeah.
find very useful?
Again, one of the things that I've done, I suppose, is that I recognised in trying to get the education system to change that was going to take a long time, and so I wanted to advise and guide and support the people at the sharp end. So I managed to get some funding from an organisation called Digital Lift, who are based in the USA, and that allowed us to provide training to all SNAs, all teaching assistants, all SENCOs in Ireland and Northern Ireland about FASD in the classroom. So that's a program we're embarking on, and that's going to make a difference at the sharp end, irrespective of if the child has got a diagnosis of FASD or anything else. It
Mm,
gives them strategies. So another key strategy we talk about in our training is about the very common fight, flight, or freeze that we will see in classrooms when a child dysregulates. And the most common reaction to dysregulation, believe it or not, in FASD is flight. Our children will run, they will climb, they will hide. And so the best way to deal with that is to provide them with a safe space, because what our children do as part of their survival strategy, and we're not aware of this, is that they will know in every single classroom that they go into, in every single part of the school, what their escape route is. Their head is full of escape routes. So if they are challenged or threatened, they know exactly the way out of that classroom. So if the teacher is standing in the doorway, they might know they can get out of a window and what the drop is. They will have already calculated that, because most of our children will have embarked on the flight mode. And so what we do with our SNAs and our SENCOs is we talk about a safe space. Now, it doesn't have to be in a sensory room, because not all schools have a sensory room, and half of those are occupied by teachers who are having a quick nap between lessons. So what we talk about is, for example, putting a coloured beanbag in the corner of the library, so it's a quiet space, the child will know that's their safe space to go to. The SNA or the TA will know not to follow, because if we follow, we're poking the bear. But we know that they've gone. It might be that somebody walks past the room and says, yes, they're in there. But usually what happens is once the child has regulated themselves in their safe space, they will return to class of their own volition. They don't need somebody to
Absolutely.
come and get them. Yeah.
And
It's
this,
it's those interventions where the teacher goes after them or the SNA goes after them and says, oh, are you okay? Calm down, come back with me. We don't want that.
no,
That doesn't work. It's going to escalate. What we want is we want to know they're safe. We want to understand what the triggers were that caused it. Of course we do. But we also want them to regulate so that they come back into education when they're ready to do so. We can have a
absolutely.
post-mortem as adults
Mm.
later, but
And
all we want is them to feel safe enough to come back.
absolutely. And this is something that in our last webinar, we had adults with FASD that were talking about some of the experiences they had in education. And if you haven't seen that, anybody that hasn't seen that, please do. You can view all our previous webinars, all our films on our YouTube channel at FASD Awareness. And one of the great things about that webinar was that you had, I think it was Maggie May in that particular scenario, explaining how her teacher understood and could see when she was escalating, and
Yeah.
she would be given the rubber, the board rubber, to take into another classroom. It just took her away from it. She came back, and that was a teacher that had the insight to be
Yes.
able to monitor when this was going to happen. But then she learned to be able to do that herself and self-regulate. And I think this is something that is happening time and time again, that it's a simple measure that a teacher can work with, and rather than poking the bear,
Yes.
let's just work with them and understand where we're going with this. I'm just going to go through a few of the questions that going back to the lanyards. Anne O'Neill was saying that my two adopted children, ages 11 and 10, won't wear the lanyards as they are embarrassed. Can you please advise us? I can, I've got
Yes.
something there, but please, you're the guest.
Sure. Of course. Well, we recognise that lots of people prefer not to wear the lanyard because of any sort of reason. So, in the first instance, the lanyards can be worn by the parents or carers that are with the children. There's no demand that the children themselves would have to wear it. But also, you might find it more useful. We have some silicone wristbands, or we have little ribbon badges, or we have pin badges that can be worn as well. And particularly if your child or children like to feel that stimming with their wrist, the silicone wristbands were designed so that they can be pinged. And a lot of children do wear elastic bands around their wrist. So it's just a nicer way of wearing an elastic band. But as long as it's visible in the areas that you need it to be visible, then it will raise that awareness. What I always say to people is, you don't have to wear the lanyard, but whatever you do decide to wear, just make sure it's visible, because you can't go through an airport and say, well, I didn't get any help, if they can't see the sunflower. But all of the organisations that I work with in Ireland have to complete training. So I've just finished working with Ryanair. I trained 17,000 of their cabin crew and pilots and ground staff in the sunflower. And they all are aware of the different wearables that are available for people to wear, but they also understand that a parent or a carer may be wearing it on behalf of their child.
Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. There's another one. Would training be open to educational settings in the UK at all? I can answer that one. There are organisations up and down the country that offer training, and excellent training. I think one of the things that we're very conscious of as well, every area has a different system, if you like. So therefore, the organizations that are based in your area, go online, type in FASD in your area. There will be an organization, and they will be very happy to help with education. In the southeast of England at the moment, we're working with CCGs on training up, working with educational training on that. We will also, in the new year, we'll be offering our own online webinar training as well, that people can sign up to, professionals or those with lived experience that want further advice. And we'll be doing that in the new year as well. But in the meantime, I don't know how you have the time to do all these amazing things. You've been going, I know what it's like for us as a charity where we've got an amazing team of people that support us and volunteers that come in and just make our lives a lot easier. And we are so grateful for those people to be able to give us the opportunity and the time to be able to deliver what we need to deliver. We all know what needs to be done, and we're learning from each other, from organizations all over the country. You mentioned Martin. There are so many people that it's crazy to reinvent the wheel. And people have done a lot of good work in this. And so therefore, talking amongst communities and being able to use that to help our own communities, our own areas to understand better. And I've got to say, Tristan, I admire what you and Scott are doing. You really are putting your heads above the parapet and doing some amazing work. And I commend you for that. Really superb work. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And we look forward to catching up again on another webinar, no doubt. All right. Have a great night. And thank you all for joining us. And as I say, if you want to come and see any of our videos, if you want to go to FASD Ireland's website as well, please do. They've got some great news and resources on there as well. In the meantime, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next month. All the best. Bye for now.